I had always loved weekends like this, quiet, ordinary, unremarkable. They were my little pockets of peace in a life that often felt like it was moving too fast. When my brother called me on Thursday afternoon, I didn't hesitate for a second. He sounded nervous, almost guilty. "Could you watch me this weekend?" he asked, referring to his 3-year-old daughter. "I have something important I have to take care of." Normally, I would have hesitated. My life wasn't completely free work, bills, a small apartment that barely felt like mine. But I loved my niece. Mia had always had this little way of looking at you like you were the only person in the world who mattered. Like she could see straight into your heart and choose to love it anyway. I couldn't say no, of course. I said without thinking, "I'll take care of her." He sighed, relief flooding his voice. "Thanks, I really owe you this time." When he dropped her off that Friday evening, I was immediately reminded of how small and delicate she still was. She clung to his leg for a moment before looking up at me with those big, trusting eyes, the ones that seemed older than her age, somehow wise, somehow aware. "Uncle," she asked softly. She had just learned to say uncle, and her voice held the sweetness of someone testing a world that was sometimes too big for her. I scooped her up, feeling that familiar warm tug in my chest. The first few hours passed normally. We had dinner together, macaroni and cheese, the kind she liked, and I tried not to burn it like I always did. And then we played quietly with her blocks. She was gentle but precise, stacking them carefully, and I smiled at her focus, marveling at how much she reminded me of my own childhood, the way I had been when my mother had been watching over me. As the evening wore on, I noticed small, curious things. Mia would pause mid, play and stare at me, sometimes tilting her head as if she were trying to tell me something without words. She asked odd questions, too, not the usual "why is the sky blue?" or "can I have a cookie?" but things like, "does Auntie remember the tree in the garden?" or "why does Uncle's hair look like clouds?" I laughed it off, thinking it was the product of her vivid imagination, but there was an intensity in her gaze that made me pause sometimes, made me wonder if she saw something I didn't. By bedtime, I was exhausted, but I tucked her in carefully, smoothing the hair from her forehead. She clutched her blanket, eyes half closed, and whispered, "Uncle, will you stay with me until I sleep?" "Of course, sweetheart," I said softly. I sat beside her little bed, watching her eyelids droop and listening to the quiet rhythm of her breathing. The room smelled faintly of lavender and baby lotion, and for a moment I allowed myself to breathe deeply, to let the calm settle over me. It was ordinary, peaceful, and I cherished that. I didn't know that the night had more to reveal secrets I had buried, memories I had tried to forget, and a whisper that would break open my past. I didn't know that a simple weekend of babysitting would become the turning point in my life, for now, though, all was quiet. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the heater and Mia's steady breathing. I felt protective, almost reverent, of this small life entrusted to me. Little did I know that the clock was ticking toward midnight, toward a moment that would change everything I thought I knew about my family, about trust, and about myself. And so I waited, calm and unaware, for the night to speak its secrets. Midnight arrived quietly, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I had been dozing lightly in the armchair by Mia's bed, half, listening to the soft hum of the heater, half, lost in thoughts of work and errands I needed to run on Monday. The world outside was silent, the kind of silence that feels almost sacred until a voice broke it. "Uncle," it was Mia. Her small frame was under the covers, but she was sitting up, her dark eyes wide and alert. "Do you remember her?" she whispered. I blinked, trying to understand. "Remember who, sweetheart?" I asked, my voice calm, soothing, though a strange unease had already begun to creep into my chest. She paused, chewing her lower lip as if weighing every word. Then she spoke the name, a name I hadn't heard in 20 years. My chest tightened, my stomach dropped, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I froze. The room seemed to shrink around me. That name had been a shadow in my past, a wound I had buried under years of busy days, therapy sessions, and careful avoidance. I hadn't spoken it aloud, not even to myself in decades, and here it was, coming from the lips of a 3-year-old who shouldn't even know it existed. "Mia, where did you hear that?" I asked gently, trying to keep my voice steady. She tilted her head, her expression serious, far too serious for her age. "Mom told me. She said you would understand," and my heart sank. My brother's wife, my niece's mother. Somehow, quietly, they had woven this secret into a child's mind, something meant to manipulate, to test, to see how I would react. Betrayal washed over me in waves, sharp and cold, and yet I couldn't show it, not to her, not here in the middle of the night, with her trusting me so completely. I swallowed and leaned back, forcing myself to breathe slowly. I remember. I said softly, carefully choosing my words. I needed to stay calm, to not let the anger or hurt rise too quickly. Mia's gaze was unwavering, innocent yet strangely knowing. I realized she had been carrying this too, in her own small way, a message from the adults around her that I was only now beginning to understand. The rest of the night passed in silence, though my mind was anything but quiet. I watched her sleep, her chest rising and falling, and felt a mixture of protectiveness and sorrow. How many times had the people I trusted chosen secrecy over honesty? How many times had family hidden the truth, thinking they were sparing me, when in reality they were testing me? The betrayal wasn't loud or dramatic. There were no raised voices, no shouts. It was quiet, insidious, a subtle shaping of events that left me feeling small, excluded, like an observer in my own life. And yet, through that betrayal, I felt something else growing inside me, a strange, steady clarity. By the time dawn crept through the curtains, I had made a decision. I wouldn't react with anger. I wouldn't lash out or demand apologies in a storm of words. I would watch, observe, and understand. I would let the truth reveal itself on its own, and I would meet it with calm, quiet strength. Mia stirred in her sleep, murmuring something under her breath that I didn't catch. I smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She had unknowingly delivered a truth I wasn't ready to confront fully, but she had reminded me of my own resilience, the wisdom I had earned through years of learning to protect my heart. That weekend was no longer just a simple favor. It was the beginning of a reckoning I hadn't anticipated, and as I sipped my coffee in the quiet kitchen later that morning, I realized the journey ahead would require patience, observation, and the kind of emotional courage I hadn't yet tapped into but would soon need in full measure. For now, I told myself, I would hold my silence like a shield. I would listen. I would watch, and I would prepare. The weekend stretched on like a slow, moving tide, and I found myself noticing things I had never paid attention to before. Mia had returned to her usual playfulness, as if nothing had happened at midnight, but I couldn't shake the weight of her words. That name, the one I had buried for 20 years, echoed quietly in my mind, like a shadow moving just at the edge of my vision. I started observing carefully, not just Mia, but my brother and his wife. I noticed small inconsistencies in their stories, tiny slips that might have seemed insignificant to anyone else but rang loudly to me. A text left unread, a vague excuse, a nervous glance, they were threads, and I could feel the fabric of truth beginning to unravel beneath the surface. It wasn't immediate. I didn't confront them. I didn't even ask questions. I simply watched. I listened. I made mental notes and let the silence work for me. In the past, I had been reactive, impulsive, sometimes even desperate for answers, but now I realized that real strength came from patience. Observation was power disguised as calm. One afternoon, Mia and I were sitting in the living room. drawing pictures with crayons. She paused mid-stroke, looked up at me with those big, knowing eyes, and whispered again, "Uncle, do you remember how it felt?" I froze, my hand hovering over the paper. "How what felt, sweetheart?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, but inside, a storm was beginning to gather. She tilted her head, smiling faintly, "When she left and you had to stay behind." It was a passing comment from a 3-year old, and yet it hit me with the force of a memory long suppressed. I had been abandoned in subtle ways by parents, by siblings, by people who claimed to love me, and each whisper, each unspoken decision had left a mark. And here was my niece, a tiny vessel carrying pieces of truth that had been kept from me, speaking them aloud in her innocent yet piercing way. That night I began thinking about the patterns, the subtle betrayals that had shaped my life. How often had family members chosen convenience over honesty? How many decisions had been made that left me out, uninformed, yet expected to accept them quietly? The realization was painful, yes, but it also brought clarity. I could feel myself stepping back from the emotional chaos that once defined me, letting the anger and hurt exist without letting them control me. I started to understand the quiet wisdom in restraint. I didn't need to confront them in a storm of words. I didn't need dramatic explanations or apologies. I could let their actions reveal the truth over time, and in doing so, I would preserve my dignity and inner peace. By the final evening of the weekend, I had pieced together enough. I could see how the choices of the adults around me had shaped Mia's understanding of our family. I could see the small manipulations, the quiet tests of loyalty, the way my feelings had been overlooked, not out of malice, perhaps, but out of interest, habit, or fear. And I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for the deception I had endured, and relief that I could finally face it with a calm, clear mind. I tucked Mia into bed for the last time that weekend, brushing her hair back gently. "Sleep well, little one," I whispered. And as I watched her drift off, I felt the first real stirrings of a decision I had been edging toward all these years. I would no longer allow the past to dictate my present. I would step forward quietly, firmly, and with wisdom. The weekend had begun with trust. It had been shaken by revelation. And now, as the house settled into silence, I felt something else emerging, a quiet strength tempered by patience and observation that would guide me toward the life I wanted, and the peace I deserved. By Sunday afternoon, the weekend had come full circle, and I felt a quiet resolve settling over me. Mia played happily in the living room, blocks scattered around her like a small city of imagination, while I sat at the kitchen table sipping the last of my coffee. The weight of the past days was heavy but manageable now, tempered by the calm I had nurtured within myself. I thought about the midnight whisper, the name that had shattered my carefully constructed sense of safety. It had reopened old wounds, yes, but it had also illuminated something I had forgotten, my own power. Not the power to control others, but the power to choose how I respond, the power to set boundaries and protect my heart. When my brother returned, I noticed the subtle tension in his posture. He avoided my eyes at first, probably expecting guilt or anger from me. I didn't give him what he wanted. Instead, I smiled calmly and helped him take Mia's things to the car. There were no accusations, no shouting matches, no dramatic confrontations. I had learned that peace doesn't come from force. It comes from quiet clarity and deliberate action. On the drive home, Mia fell asleep on my shoulder, small and trusting, unaware of the emotional work I had done over the weekend. I looked at her sleeping face and felt a protective warmth. I had realized that my niece didn't need me to fight for her or punish anyone. She needed me to be steady, trustworthy, and emotionally strong. And that strength, I understood, would carry us both through the subtle currents of family dynamics without compromise. Later that evening, Back in my apartment, I sat quietly with a notebook and wrote down everything I had observed over the weekend. I noted patterns of secrecy, small manipulations, and moments of emotional dishonesty. But alongside them, I wrote my intentions, boundaries I would uphold, patience I would maintain, and the calm I would preserve. This wasn't revenge, it was self-respect in practice. It was dignity lived quietly, not shouted. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to reflect not with pain, but with clarity. I realized that some truths would never be explained, some betrayals never acknowledged, and some people never changed. And that was okay. My responsibility was not to fix them. My responsibility was to protect my own heart, to cultivate my own wisdom, and to show up fully for those who mattered, like Mia, like myself. Over the next few weeks, I maintained my distance, not out of spite, but out of necessity. I continued to love and care for my niece, seeing her on visits and spending time in a way that felt balanced and respectful. My brother and his wife were, at times, awkward, but they learned slowly that my calmness was not weakness. It was quiet authority. They saw that I would no longer bend to manipulation, and in doing so, they began to respect it, and I, in turn, felt a profound sense of relief. The anger, the hurt, the shadows of old betrayals, all of it had been transformed into something solid and quiet. I didn't need their acknowledgement to feel whole. I didn't need their apologies to feel validated. I had rediscovered my own inner strength, my own sense of peace, and my own ability to set boundaries without shame. One evening, as I watched Mia laughing over a puzzle she had solved, I realized the life lesson that had quietly emerged. Respect is earned not through confrontation, but through consistency. Boundaries are strongest when held calmly, and emotional strength is not measured by how loudly you assert yourself, but by how peacefully you can protect your heart in a world that sometimes forgets it belongs to you. I smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face, feeling a quiet pride. The weekend had begun as a simple favor, evolved into a test of patience and observation, and ended with a truth I had always known but rarely practiced. I am the guardian of my own heart, and that alone is enough.